The Caribbean islands with a disproportionate number of would-be Daesh militants. They are motivated to travel thousands of miles to fight. We discover why. Plus, green energy generation and the challenges of supply and demand. How do we store electricity for later use? I'm Martin Stanford. This is Insight. Welcome to Insight. While the battle goes on to defeat Daesh in Iraq and Syria, governments around the world are fighting to contain the flow of their citizens travelling to that region to join the terror groups there. Tens of thousands have made the journey of thousands of kilometres to fight. But not all stay on the battlefield very long. Experts suggest between 20 and 30% have since returned home. Leaving the comforts of your home to join a conflict abroad isn't a new occurrence. But the extent to which foreign fighters from all over the world have left to make their journey to Syria and Iraq has garnered much attention. The attention heightened following the rise of Daesh, a group thousands have joined, often leaving their families behind. It's thought that around 30,000 fighters have travelled to Syria and Iraq in the recent conflict. They've joined groups including Daesh, Jabhat Fatah, Al-Sham and YPG, travelling from at least 86 countries throughout the world. The 5 nations with the highest count of foreign fighters are Tunisia, Saudi Arabia, Russia, Turkey and Jordan. The latest figures show a 300% increase, despite the various attempts by individual countries and the international community to stem the flow of people leaving. One community with a disproportionate number of aspiring fighters travelling to Syria are the twin Caribbean territories of Trinidad and Tobago. Well, to discuss that further, I'm joined now by the journalist Amanda Thomas-Johnson, who joins us after a 2-month-long investigation looking into why 100 or so Trinidadians have travelled to Syria. Paint a picture. What's life like for most Trinidadians these days?
As I'm sure you're aware, Trinidad and Tobago is, a beautiful sort of Caribbean country, 2 islands, Trinidad and Tobago.
We see it on the holiday posters.
Yeah.
It looks sunny.
Yeah,
it looks nice. It looks pleasant. It looks chilled.
There's Calypso, there's Carnival, there's white sand beaches, all of that. But there is another side to the country as well. The country is an oil-rich country, and with oil prices tumbling the last few years, the economy has been in a downturn. This means that job prospects for young people have sort of dwindled. There's a lot of crime. It has one of the highest crime rates in the world. Now, those who've gone to Syria have tended to be part of the sort of black community, and they in particular are faring pretty badly. There's racism as well among Trinidad's very diverse ethnic groups. And I think that there's a sense of disenfranchisement among many young people who can't get jobs, who don't have educational opportunities, and who are then feeling that they could try and find a life elsewhere in Syria.
Racism between whom against whom?
Trinidad and Tobago is sort of split down the middle between sort of East Indians and blacks in terms of sort of power structures. We have two main political parties. One sort of tends to be represented by the blacks, the other the East Indian community. And when one gets into power, there tends to be a sort of struggle to sort of get all the sort of grapes in the basket, so to speak, so that the other one doesn't have anything when they come into power.
Is there overt persecution then of the other community?
I think when we're talking in terms of business opportunities, for example, so contracts are given to maybe communities that are going to vote. It's a two-party state where corruption and sort of racism, unfortunately, have taken root.
Trinidad and Tobago, though, had a Christian tradition with various denominations and flavours. Evangelical Christians were there, weren't they, in great numbers? Where did the Muslim adherents come in?
Muslims have been there since the early 19th century. There were Muslim slaves, black Muslim slaves from Africa. But in the mid-19th century, when slaves were actually freed, we then had indentured labourers from the Indian subcontinent coming in. Some of these were Hindu, but many of them were Muslim as well. And this meant that the sort of Indian-flavoured Islam took root in the country. We had to wait until the 1970s, until the Black Power movement associated with Malcolm X and others in America began to sort of percolate into Trinidad and Tobago. And we saw at that time many blacks, inspired by the Nation of Islam and other groups, actually embracing Islam as well. This then led after 30 years, 20 years or so, to 1990, when there was actually a Muslim-led coup in the country. Only a 6-day uprising, which was eventually put down.
But was that a political movement who happened to be Muslims, or was it definitely the Muslim faith asserting its power?
From what I understand, it was a political movement who happened to be Muslim, but who were at the same time inspired. This is what they told me, by by justice, by the qualities of justice, equality, and others, which are sort of Quranic principles as well. The coup leader, Abu Bakr, sort of saw himself as a sort of leader of Muslims as well as blacks, and we actually had many sort of non-Muslims also supporting him as well.
So a complicated mix of politics and race and religion.
Sure.
And now we spin forward to this era and the 2010s onwards. What do you think has inspired so many young Trinidadians to try to get to Syria or to fight Daesh in that particular part of the world?
Again, as I mentioned, there is a lack of opportunity. Within the Muslim community itself, I think it's important to look at how that functions. The sort of black associated sort of mosques tend not to be on the sort of leadership panels or the sort of community groups. They're not represented as much. And so there is a sort of rift between the more traditional East Indian community and the more nascent sort of black African Muslim
So would you
community.
say that's a mistake of the centre, of the power base, not to be more inclusive and to make sure everybody gets their representation right?
I think there are cultural differences which have allowed this to happen. There are political differences. The black communities have tended to be more politicized. The Indians more sort of sort of benign, sort of passive Islam. And so I think there are cultural differences which are then sort of as a result of the two communities living side by side for many years as well. So there's something within the Muslim community, but also a wider sort of rift between blacks and Indians in Trinidad and Tobago.
It's young men predominantly who might travel. If they're poor and they've got no real opportunities, how do they find the funding? How do they get out of Trinidad and Tobago and maybe make all the way to Turkey and then try and get into Syria?
It's a good question, and it's something which I couldn't actually determine in my work. From what I understand, people who go to Syria, go through a number of routes. Sometimes they go through Venezuela and go through the Philippines, for example.
Really?
Sometimes they go to Curacao.
I'll literally go halfway around the world
halfway
to try
around
and
the
achieve
world.
this.
Yeah, yeah.
And what supporters presumably are either hiding them or smuggling them or maybe funding them in some way.
Perhaps, yes. I mean, Shane Crawford, who was a subject of my investigation, it is said that he actually came through London on his way there. So they use a variety of routes to get there. How they're funded is unclear to me.
From what you've discovered, was the life with Daesh or fighting in the Middle East all it was cracked up to be, or was there some disappointments once the realities of life over there came in?
Shane Crawford, who is the subject of my piece, I spoke to his mother about his experiences there. Now, she speaks to him every now and again, sort of leaving voice notes on WhatsApp or whatever. And she told me that he's happy to be there. He apparently posted a picture of himself with a Siamese cat next to a swimming pool, and that sort of thing. But I've spoken to other people, and they've said, for example, that Shane Crawford's wife, is trying to escape from Daesh, and that she's in a camp actually trying to get back to Trinidad and Tobago. So I think there's a mixed bag there. I think that as ISIS implodes places like Mosul, we will see people trying to get back. There's no doubt.
Return to their homeland.
And return to their homeland.
Yeah. And what are the consequences there? What's the government view of returnees?
The government has been trying to bolster its counter-terrorism arsenal. It's introducing laws such as citizenship stripping, which we've seen in some Western countries, including the UK. It is also bolstering its information and intelligence sharing sort of capacity with countries such as Turkey, who sort of is a sort of many people pass through Turkey to get into Syria, and they're also speaking to the communities as well. There is some fear within the communities. The government's measures, such as trying to control the Friday sermon, could be going too far. So that's a discussion taking place now between the government and the communities.
Well, they literally want to censor what is preached
I mean, I spoke to the Attorney General of Trinidad and Tobago, and that's what he told me, that they're actually trying to...
They're considering it, or they've done it already?
They're actually considering it as we speak.
Well, they're not going to put spies into every mosque, are they? Or into every church to hear what every clergyman of any persuasion says?
I think from what I understand, they're going to have a more targeted approach, if anything. The government sort of see certain mosques in the country as sort of having a radical edge.
Yes.
And I suspect that they will have a more targeted approach to those mosques.
So they'll come under increasing scrutiny as
Sure.
time goes by. Do they see the other side of this, though, that may be trying to address the root causes, as you explained, the lack of opportunity, the lack of finance, the lack of job prospects, maybe poor education in the first place?
Sure.
Is there not a need to sort of address that side of this equation too?
Around 5 years ago, the government introduced a program called a Citizenship Security Program, and this targeted 22 hotspot areas throughout the country. Now, it used to run a number of programs, sports programs, sort of educational, sort of supplementary schools, but they've since stopped the initiative. And from the people I've spoken to, this is a sort of program that could really go a long way in sort of steering
It wasn't
people.
just a gesture, it did actually work, did it?
It did actually work, apparently. And, you know, the United Nations Development Program actually did a report that said that this program is helping a lot, but they fear that the government may stop it, and the government have stopped it. And there has to be some sort of, you know, way of steering people away from violence. I think that it's important to see people going off to Syria as not separated from the sort of social problems of guns, of drugs, and of family problems that you know that are in Trinidad and Tobago. I think they're you know, many heads of the same sort of monster.
Amandla Thomas Johnson, thank you very much indeed for being with us today.
Thank you very much.
This is Insight. Coming up, shining a light on solar power. Is this the energy of the future?